Do you think that a child can consent to have a body part removed? Speaking of Matt Walsh, we could watch this back and forth testimony as he was in a health committee on a bill that was intending to ban gender affirming care on minors. So this is gender affirming care, period. So this isn't like just surgery. This isn't just, you know, oh, well, this specific type of medication. This is gender affirming care. So any of the psychological treatment that could be gender affirming, any of that, banned. So if you're a trans young person at the age of 14, 15, 16, 17, any of that, you just can't get care and help this this issue that you have until you're an adult, all the way up until the age of 18. It's pretty wild, definitely considering the amount of suicides there are in the trans community, that you would want to take away the resources that is actively stopping people from killing themselves. So yeah, it rubs me the wrong way, to say the least, but I wanted to watch this back and forth because I saw a snippet of this on Twitter, and the viciousness with a lot of these elected officials treated Matt Walsh, because many of them knew who he was before he testified. It's pretty brutal, man. Let's check it out.
Who would this be directed to? Would you like to come up?
If I could ask Mr. Walsh.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, if you would mind.
Matt, thank you for being here.
You're recognized.
Just a quick question for you. We've heard in the news last week and even today that it's pro-life to vote against this bill. We've heard that suicides are prevalent, and suicide has impacted my family, so I'm sensitive when I hear something like that. I've read some of the stuff that you've done, and I was wondering, can you speak to the statistics of mental health and suicidal tendencies for the people who have gone through transition and for people who have not? In your studies, from what I've read, can you speak to that?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
Sure. Well, the claim that doing the chemical castration drugs or surgery or hormonal intervention, the claim that this prevents suicide or has positive psychological effects down the line is utterly, totally baseless. There are no credible long-term studies that bear that out. And one of the reasons for that is that there couldn't possibly be any credible long-term studies because we've never done this to kids on this scale ever before in history. So this current, shall we say, crop of children, they are the guinea pigs.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt his statement because I want to hear what he has to say, hear the response, and add anything else that I don't want to say, because I don't just want to repeat something that the elected official is going to say anyway. I do that a lot in videos. I'm trying to stop that. But crop of children? Crop of who refers to children? What about this generation? Like any other crop? What are they, a wheat field? I'm sorry, let's continue.
This is all experimental. We're sort of trying it out on them to see if it works. Now, they have attempted a few times to do studies, and the interesting thing is that the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, WPATH, which is a radical far-left pro-trans organization, they commissioned a study to try to prove that that hormones and puberty blockers decrease suicide rates among trans-identified youth, and even in their own study, they found that they couldn't prove it. They couldn't make that link because it's just not possible to do. The other thing I would mention too is that, the number of trans-identified youth has skyrocketed in recent years. We're talking about exponential 10x, 20x growth. Just huge numbers have increased. And what we hear from the pro-trans side is that, well, this is not a social contagion. It's just that, there's always been this many trans people. It's just that they were not in an affirming environment before in history, and so they couldn't come out. And now, for the first time, trans people have the ability to live their truth, so to speak. Well, if that's the case, and there have always been these sort of like millions of trans people, and if it's also true that if we don't affirm them, that it would cause them to commit suicide, then we should be able to look back in history and find just this unbroken, incredible epidemic of children mysteriously killing themselves because they weren't being affirmed as trans. And what you find is that that didn't exist. I mean, the youth suicide rate has increased exponentially alongside trans affirmation. So trans affirmation causes the suicide rate, not the other way around.
Okay, so I'm sorry. That's just a bizarre claim. He says that the suicide rate is going up broadly amongst young people, and he said that that is somewhat that if you look at the amount of trans affirmative care that's going on in the United States, that's increasing. Therefore, the increase in suicide rates is because of the trans affirming care. Therefore, it causes it. Boom. Then he tries to move on, right? Then he moves on, but he doesn't give you a moment to sit down and think about what he just said. And I'm sorry to interrupt because I have more things to say when he's done, but I do need to jump on this because he kind of like rolls past it, and I'll forget it if I don't. What he just did there was like just the most basic of correlation, causation. Like, we have no way to prove that the increase in affirming care has caused that spike in suicide. Definitely when there are a ton of studies, which I'm sure the legislator will bring up, or I will bring up afterwards, talking about the Trevor Project and other organizations, which I've fundraised for and have helped out in the ways that I can, and studies that they've done or been associated with that have showed more than 40% decreases in depression amongst trans youth who get this types of care, which also obviously leads to a decrease in suicidality. But when it comes to that, I don't know if you guys know this, and this is a great example of how I can show the flawed thinking here. Did you know that violent crime goes up at the same rate that ice cream consumption goes up? That when ice cream consumption spikes, violent crime spikes. This is true. This is a real fact. Google it. If you Google it, you'll see a million different articles talking about this phenomenon. This is the go-to example to prove correlation does not mean causation, because the reason why we see an increase in ice cream consumption is due to heat, because it's the summer, which also causes an increase in crime. But then you can be deceptive and try to tie these two things together and say increase in violent crime, increase of ice cream, causing each other. And you can lie about it. And it's a funny statistic, something to point to, an example of this fallacy, which he is practicing right now. There is nothing directly tying an increase in gender affirming care to an increase in suicide. There isn't. Could it at all have to do with the pandemic that's going on and COVID and the lack of socialization, or could it have anything to do with social media and the huge spike in social media and the images women have of themselves, of young girls have of themselves when it comes to Instagram and that self-image? By the way, Matt Walsh, same person who goes out and calls trans women he sees ugly on command and tries to bully them, cares really a ton about suicide rates among trans people, as he's on his show actively saying trans women are ugly, trans women are this, trans women are that, you'll never be a true woman. I wonder if that could possibly lead to increases in suicidality among young trans people. But no, correlation does not mean causation. Anyway, let's continue.
Last thing I'll note is that the suicide rate among trans-identified people is sky high. It remains sky high. All the data shows this. It remains sky high even after surgery. And in fact, in the most reliable data that we have, it's years after surgery when suicidality is the highest for trans-identified people.
Okay, sorry. Somebody just said this in Gutter Chat. I want to respond to it. Leon Test said, contend with his main point, with the main point. Where are the thousands of trans kids unaliving themselves throughout history? Well, number one, the problem with the increase in suicide could be untied to transness, period. If there's an increase in suicidality amongst all young people, that seems to indicate that there's other issues that young people are facing that could cause suicide. Social media was something that I pointed to. Self-image on Instagram and a lot of these websites really like altering your self-image. But when it comes to the statistics on trans women unaliving themselves on history, here's my question. Where's the data on it? I can't do the research because there's no data from the year 1920 on the percentage of trans people killing themselves, because not many trans people were coming out with the fact you were trans. If you were a young person saying, I feel like, I actually feel like a girl, I feel like a woman. If you were to say that to anyone, they'd call you fucking stupid, they slap you, and they wouldn't treat you with medical care or mental health care or try to get you gender affirming care. And so there's a decent chance that you don't want to go up to anybody and talk about that. If you lived in the year 1920, here's my question. Who do you go to ask to say, hey, I'm trans? Legitimately, who would you go to? Do you go to your pastor? Oh my God, no. Do you go to your parents? Probably not. Many trans girls today still don't go to their parents. Where do you go? It'd probably be underground societies would be like the one place I can think of. Underground gay bars and areas like that, which would probably be more friendly to you. But even sometimes there, you're not even going to get that good of treatment. There are transphobic homosexuals. They do exist, but that would be one of the more safe places. But they're not gonna. Do you think they're not tallying the data on suicide in these bars and stuff? Hell, I mean, the idea that they would keep a written record of somebody going to one of these underground institutions would be terrifying to the people going there because they don't want it to get out that they're gay, trans, or bisexual. So you're asking me for data that I can't show or prove, or I don't have any data on trans suicide from that time. And the social position of trans people has changed so drastically recently that it's really hard for me to try to use any data from that time, which doesn't already exist, to try to calculate this. But what he says here, that claim that gender affirming care increases suicide amongst young people, there is nothing bearing that out. He's trying to bring about causation where there's only where there's no there's no data, there's nothing connecting them, there's no causation, there's no point A to point B there. That's what I'm contending with. There isn't. There's been no study on that. There's been no study showing that gender affirming care increases suicides. In fact, the majority of gender affirming care studies that I've seen seem to indicate that the suicides have decreased. In fact, I have one from a Google Doc that I have on save because I'm trying to study this a lot more recently. This is from Forbes. Gender affirming care linked to less depression, lower suicide risk for trans youth. This was done with a sample size of 9,000 people. Half of all trans and non-binary young people said they are not using GAHT, but would like to. 36% were not interested. 14% were already receiving it. Youth of color had lower rates of access to GAHT when they wanted it compared to white youth. Young people receiving it reported a lower likelihood of experience of recent depression and considering suicide compared to those who wanted it but did not receive it. Receiving GAHT was associated with nearly 40% lower odds of recent depression and of a past year suicide attempt by young people under the age of 18. And nearly 80% of those who received it reported they had at least one parent who supported their gender identity, showing that parental support for a child's gender identity is strongly associated with the receipt of GAHT. My goodness. This is one study. There's a bunch of others. I guess I don't know if it meets all of Matt Walsh's standards for this is the proper study. It certainly has a large enough sample size. I don't think it was done to, I don't think there's any evidence of it being the numbers being fudged or anything. I don't know if it meets all of his amazing standards. They needed to do the study while doing a handstand and doing 20 backflips. I don't know, but none of the data that he's claiming exists that show that suicide rates are being caused by gender affirming care to rise. That doesn't exist.
Cool. That's the reality.
Chairman President, you're good? Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Walsh while we're out of session? Mr. Hammer? Representative Hammer?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I found it interesting. One of our people testified today that they had their gender affirming surgery at 16. And I know you in former comments mentioned this on your blog. At about 16, you're an adult who's mature and can make decisions. You're that at 16. I don't care what anybody says. Even going so far as to say, 16 people when you're 16, you should be married and could be pregnant or should be pregnant. So,
by the way, there are many states. Which, by the way, actually, Tennessee. Wait. What age can you get married? Tennessee. Is it one of the states? If anyone somehow does get... Actually, it looks like... Oh, damn. 16-year-olds can get married in Tennessee. So according to Tennessee law, actually... that decision can be made, but we don't see Matt Walsh fighting against that. He's fighting against this. Cares a lot about grooming.
So I'm curious if 16 is an adult in your view. Why does this bill have the minor defined as 18?
Mr. Walsh, recognized.
Yeah, that's a hit piece you took from Media Matters, from something when I was a radio host 13, 14 years ago.
Oh yeah, I forgot. The same person who cares so much about grooming was also the same person who was talking about the fertility of the 15 and 16-year-old. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that was a Matt Walsh statement. Does anybody have that link? Does anybody have that? If this isn't edited out by Danabo, I want people to, in the replies to say, thanks, Danabo, if this is on YouTube. Audio, okay, here it is.
It is not. In fact, ever since the beginning of time, teenage girls have been getting pregnant. It used to be more common. The peak, ever since they started keeping records of these things, which they only started doing recently, like in the 20th century, but ever since they started keeping records, in 1957 was the peak for teenage pregnancy. 1957. Not 2009,
well, back
not
then,
today.
All of them were supposed to have kids. Like, that's when you had kids.
That's my point, okay? So to all of a sudden act like this phenomenon of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way. Even biologically, and this is me just stating, I'm going to start by just stating facts. So fact number one, it's not a new phenomenon. Fact number two, in fact, it's a phenomenon that was more common earlier in history, and for first
less civilized
6,000 to 10,000 years of human existence, it was a normal thing. Fact three, girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
Yeah.
Okay? That's biological. That's a fact, all right? I'm just stating facts. That's all I'm doing.
He could have moved it up a single year.
But what happened recently, and this is the fourth fact, recently in the last 30 years or so, we decided that that's way too young to start a family.
Why?
And because now
divorce rates would probably go up, and once you're that young, you can't really make sure that you know.
No, all right, pause it. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just.
Okay, can we continue? I don't need to hear the commentary, okay? I don't need the commentary. I just wanted the original audio anyway.
Anniversary, your 50th anniversary, and all this. That's a dying breed of people out there.
Yeah, and those were all people that got married very young. That's why
they're still alive.
Yeah, that's why you can have someone in their 70s who's celebrating their 55th wedding anniversary because they got married when they were teenagers. So what I'm saying is that the problem is not per se teenage pregnancy; it's unwed pregnancy. That's the problem in society. It's only problematic when you are not married and you don't have the man there to help you take care of the kids because he's a.
This is the same by the way, number one, here's my view. If you are under the age of 18, you should not be allowed to get married in any state in the United States. Period. End of paragraph. I don't care what your personal religious beliefs in Timbuktu is. That should not be allowed. That's my belief. Okay? Because if we're saying that 18 years of age is the consent age where you can have sex, right? With people who are much, much older than you, and this is now your decision to do that, and there should be a cutoff point for when you are an adult, and we've decided that to be 18. I'm fine with that number. If you want to debate that to be a different number, that's your business, but I'm fine with that number. There's a reason why Matt Walsh, in his crusade against grooming, crusades against trans people getting gender-affirming care, and not teenage marriage, or these 14, 15, 16-year-olds getting married off in places like Missouri, Montana, and Tennessee.
Coward. And the reason why we have that now are for two reasons. Because we have in current society, we live in the age of extended adolescence.
Oh my God.
Yeah, where are the fathers? That's basically. So I guess now we have the context for that segment.
Extended adolescence is a.
Anyway, there you go. If you wanted to know the context with what was being referred to, that's what Matt Walsh is calling a smear piece, even though you can just hear his audio and he's clearly saying that it's not necessarily that teenage pregnancy is the problem. The problem is a lack of teenage marriage.
Early 20s.
You know those like cults we see all the time on the TV where we see those like 14, 15, 16-year-old girls getting married off to a 30-year-old man, right? That's a problem. That's bad. That's not good. That's not good. That shouldn't have happened in the first place. Not a good thing. She shouldn't be in a position where he has to think about getting married.
It's also not an accurate reflection of what I actually said. I was talking about the fact that people tended to marry young historically, and that's all that was about.
No, it wasn't. He said that the problem isn't necessarily teenage marriage, it's a teenage pregnancy. It was the lack of marriage amongst those people who get pregnant. You brought it out. You didn't just bring up the historical phenomenon. By the way, why would you be randomly bringing up, hey, remember when we were all banging 15-year-olds back in the 18 and 16, all the back in the day, and they're getting pregnant, and then when that was, you weren't just, I don't know why you would bring that up randomly. It seems like a weird conversational topic, in my opinion. But you weren't just bringing it up just to bring it up. You brought it up to make a point about it, which you then went on to do.
How does that relate to this subject?
Just curious of your definition of if you feel like people are adults at 16 should.
No, people are adults at 18, but actually, your brain is not fully developed until you're 25. So we should be having a conversation about whether we should even be doing these surgeries to people at 18. But certainly before 18, it's absurd.
Wait, so to be clear, Matt Walsh believes that the conversation should it be legal for 18-year-olds, adults, to get sex reassignment surgery, right? He does not believe that the age of marriage, though, should be 18. It should be lower, even though he's lying about what he said, right? He could just say, my opinion's different than it was then. Could just say that, but instead he just pretends he didn't say it.
I mean,
I wonder if I walked up to him and say, I think marriage should not be allowed till you're 25. Do you think you would take to that kindly?
Do you think that a 16-year-old can meaningfully consent?
No, only 25-year-olds can join the military. Only 25-year-olds can drink. I don't think you would take to any of that kindly.
To having their body parts removed? Do you? No?
My answer to that, by the way, I do think in certain scenarios, absolutely. I think parents with their child can make that decision. Let's say that I get in a car accident, my arm gets completely mauled up and twisted, and it's like I'm bleeding profusely. Like, there's a lot of times where medics and people actually ask you for consent to do stuff. To do surgeries, to remove things, to try to save your life. In certain scenarios, absolutely, I do think parents and a child can make that decision to give consent to have that type of surgery done to them. Now, he said to have a body part removed. Yes, I do think that could be consented to. But he's referring to something else. But he always says it like, and I see in the chat right now, he's clearly not talking about that scenario. Of course he's not. But listen to how he said it. Do you think that a child can consent to have a body part removed? He's phrasing it in the most like, oh my God, that's terrible. Right? He's phrasing it that way. He could say, do you believe minors could consent to gender affirming care? He could say it like that, but people would just be like, yeah, I'm comfortable saying yes to that. But he needs to change the wording to make it sound dun, right? Make it sound as scary as possible. And that's why I'm answering his question as the way he phrased it, because he phrased it that way purposefully. And so I'm going to respond to the words he said.
We do not. Yeah, we ask the questions. It's not. It's Representative Hammer, you're recognized. No more questions. Okay. Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you give us a summary of your educational background or your healthcare education experience?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
My experience in healthcare?
Your educational background. I'm just curious. You've testified as to a lot of your own research. So I'm curious for what purpose you do that and what background you have to qualify you to speak to that.
Well, my background that qualifies me to speak to this is that I'm a human being with a brain and common sense, and I have a soul.
I'm sorry, man. I love that. You ever seen that? You know that movie where that guy pretends to be a lawyer? I think My Cousin Vinny. Could you imagine? What? It sounds like a My Cousin Vinny bit. What? How can you be a lawyer? You don't have a law degree. I got the red blood in me of a red-blooded American. You know, when God decided that I would be born into God's, that's what it comes off like a My Cousin Vinny line.
And so, therefore, I think it's a really bad idea to chemically castrate children. That is my experience. Also, I did, now it's...
Okay, can I just say, and I know this is a personal grudge, when people say chemical castration, I think a lot of people think that's like a very, oh my God, horrific thing. I hear people talk about chemical castration in that way. I was doing research on how to deal with pedophiles after they're arrested, or how to deal, and because I'm really invested in lowering the amount of child molestation in this country, okay? Very controversial opinion. And one of the things I think would be good is if we had a place where people who are having these urges to go in order to get treatment so they don't have these urges anymore. Like, pedophile be gone, right? That'd be fantastic. Could you imagine? We could do that for a lot of people to stop the molestation before it starts in the first place, which means less people molesting and less children molested, right? I felt like I had to justify why I was looking into this, but there's my justification. And I was looking into chemical castration. One of my positions is pedophiles should be able to get chemically castrated. Now, when I say that, some people on my liberal lefty left side will kind of like react to that like, ugh. Because in their mind, I think they have this idea of like somebody taking acid and like pouring it on your genitals and it's just like, like, no. Somebody takes a shot and they inject you with a shot and then it removes your sexual attraction. It removes your ability to produce. That's it. That's what is referred to as chemical castration. But when you say chemical castration, right, you get the idea in your mind of like somebody taking chemicals and like pouring it on their genitals and like burning it. But no, it's like a shot. That's all it is. It's completely non-painful too. Well, I mean, you have a shot, so if you're scared of needles, it's like a flu shot, right? And so for me, one of the things I believe is that we should make chemical castration widely available to pedophiles. So you can stop them from having these urges in the first place and completely avoid the whole scenario. So when people say chemical castration, which also, what we're talking about here, he's talking about hormone therapy, which is not chemical castration, right? Because I don't believe they're going through chemical castration. He's just using that because it sounds worse, even though chemical castration in its own is not that terrible, right? I mean, if you want to have kids, I guess it's bad, but it's not that terrible in and of itself, right? But also, he's not even, people go through hormone therapy, not chemical castration. It's two different things.
It's true. I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read, so I can read the data for myself, and that's exactly what I've done.
Representative Clemens, here.
And for what purpose?
Also, this is a great point too. Somebody just brought this up in gutter chat. Also, a lot of trans women will actually freeze their sperm before going through with gender reassignment surgery or getting large doses of hormones, and it's for this specific purpose. So, I mean, if you have enough forethought, you can even like save up in the bank, so to speak.
Do you conduct your research and use this brain of yours?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
I use it for the purpose of trying to protect children from being castrated and mutilated. That's one of the things I try to do.
Dude, I don't think he's ever been in a hearing that had to do with child castration. Okay, I don't think he's ever been in a hearing. I think what he means is gender reassignment surgery, or I think he means gender affirming care. But I don't think he's ever been in a hearing that had to do with the idea of childhood castration.
You don't use it to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You don't use it to get clicks on your.
Dude, he cares a lot about circumcision, man. Matt Walsh was outside my house the other day trying to get signatures to ban circumcision.
Let's stay
Publication.
Well, are you using it right now to try to get clicks with this interaction? No, I really like the idea
Walsh.
of getting of drawing attention to the fact that this is happening to children. I know you seem to find it very amusing. I don't.
Representative Clemens.
Well, you made a lot of misrepresentations and characterizations in your comments. So I think it's fair for me to question your background.
What did I mischaracterize?
Let me finish, please.
You're recognized, Representative Clemens.
You know, if you're going to come before a committee and make mischaracterizations and misrepresentations, it's fair game for us to ask you your educational background and your foundational knowledge for making such characterizations. That's my point. So I'm curious about you speaking to the development of the human brain by the age of 25. I seem to recall you advocating on behalf of firearm possession at the age of 18. Do you think that's appropriate?
Let's stay on the bill, please.
That's all I got.
Okay.
Yeah, well, can I respond to that?
Representative Mitchell, you're recognized.
I can't respond to what.
Nope, guess not. They just complete. Nope, no response.
Thank you, Mr.
Moved it on. Okay.
Chairman. So, you know, I think your original article, blog post, or tweet, or whatever, kind of started this firestorm. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, where we need to look for these surgeries, because I'm still trying to find, you know, the surgeries, because, you know, the sponsor of the bill last week, I kind of agreed with him. I said we need to split this bill into two parts. You know, I may agree with him on the surgery part because I don't think it's happening. So, you know, you seem to have started this, so I need your evidence of where these surgeries are occurring in Tennessee. Could you give me, you know, places, times, maybe some names, or something that you know of?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
My evidence is the healthcare provider's own words. You know, I outlined Vanderbilt Health and their transgender care program, and the people that work for that program, their own words, talking about what they do, and talking about, for example, providing the chemical castration drugs to adolescent children.
The chemical castration drugs. Okay, number one, I think he means hormone therapy. And number two, that isn't surgery. So he asks what's surgery, and his response is, well, they can get hormones. Hormones aren't surgery. You can get hormones and surgery, but hormone is like you inject hormones, right? It's like you don't need to like get under the scalpel in order to take hormones. It's not an answer to the question.
As far as surgeries, you know, double mastectomies do happen, and the way that I know that they happen is that after I called attention to this program at Vanderbilt, they said that they were going to stop performing, they were going to put a pause on the program that performs these surgeries on minors.
Wait, which surgeries? He said it was, okay, I don't know. I feel like he might have fumbled that. I don't know what surgeries? He said it was, well, okay, I don't know.
And so if you're pausing the program that performs surgeries on minors, then I'm going to assume that the program existed. Otherwise, you couldn't have paused it. So now, the exact number of kids who are being subjected to this, I don't know exactly. It's really hard to come up with those numbers, I think, because the people doing it aren't really proud of it, and there's not a lot of interest on their end to tell us. But I do think that, you know, even one child being horrifically mutilated is too many. So I know that it's more than one, and that's reason enough to put a stop to this, I would say.
Representative Mitchell, you're recognized.
Yeah. So last week I had an amendment that, you know, we're looking to protect children from abuse.
By the way, can we say, when it comes to the numbers thing, was like how many is being mutilated, I think how many children are being horrifically mutilated, it's really good to bring up this clip, which somebody just brought up. Joe Rogan, Matt Walsh, millions. I love this clip. It's one of my favorite Joe Rogan clips. Oh my God. Oh my goodness.
You're talking about hormone blockers.
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
It says it's kind of undercounted, but that
would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Millions a year, less than 1,000 a year. They're basically the same.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, you know, hundreds of thousands at this, but I could be wrong.
Wow. Okay, it went from millions now to hundreds of thousands. Still far off, but I guess a little closer.
Million sounds great.
Yeah, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
The Media Matters will have fun with that clip.
Okay, back to this.
Abuse. And I also had an amendment to stop cosmetic surgery of rhinoplasty and breast enhancements to minors. How would you feel about that? You know, is that mutilation of children as well under the age of 18? They can't think for themselves?
Representative Mitchell, that's not on the bill that we have.
Yeah, it is. It's surgical. It's surgical.
I'm happy to answer that.
You're free to answer, Mr. Walsh.
Okay. My personal feeling about banning breast enhancements for minors? Yes, I would be all for. Personally, I'd be all for banning that. Absolutely.
There's no way you could possibly even think of unless you're literally one of those like, you know, those people who do I don't want to call them, what do they call, beauty pageants for children? That's the only possible lobby group I can think of that would be against regulations on that. But unless you're that, I couldn't imagine anyone being against that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Representative Mitchell.
Okay, and so I think the previous representative,
can minors get breast enhancements? Can they? Can they get breast enhancements? Is that legal in Tennessee? Is that legal? If you're rich enough. Well, if you're rich enough, you can get any surgery. If you're rich enough in Tennessee, they could ban gender reassignment surgery. You can still get it. If you're rich enough. Oh my God. Money in the health system in the United States. If you have enough money, you can do anything you want. When I was 16-year-old, a girl got her tits mauled off by a pit bull and is going to have to live 2 to 3 years with only one. I hadn't thought about the rare tit mauling incident when I thought of my position on breast enhancements for minors. I guess if somebody was literally mauled by a pit bull in the boobs, then maybe in that specific instance, there could be an exception written into the law saying if you're mauled or if you have a tit-related injury, then maybe you could try to get the enhancement. Maybe then. I hadn't thought about the rare pit bull mauling.
Prove that you have no medical background, correct?
No.
So you're here probably just as a public policy. You're trying to address good public policy, correct?
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
So I just have to question, some of your public policy, expertise when, I'm reading here, Singapore is able to have nice things in part because they execute drug dealers by hanging
They found his
and
Twitter.
arrest even petty vandals and thieves and beat them with a cane until they bleed. We don't have nice things here because we aren't willing to do what is required to maintain them. So, with statements like that, I kind of have to question your public policy.
Dude, I gotta be honest, completely unrelated, okay? If I was the chairman of this board, I'd probably by rules be like, that's unrelated, sir, you can't bring that up. But that is funny. Somebody said old tweets, Monka X. That is not an old tweet. He made that tweet like 2 weeks ago. Like, that is like a tweet from maybe a month-old tweet at max. That is not even an old tweet. That's something he currently believes.
And, and you also
again one ISIS-style judicial system.
Stated there'd been no studies. Well, I'm sitting here holding a study from the American Academy of Pediatrics from the University of Pittsburgh about the suicidal disparities between transgender and cisgender adults and children. So I think, before you state things, you may need to know all the facts.
Damn.
Thank you.
Wasn't even going to say in response to that. He's just going to be like, well, when we start executing them in the street, you're first, Senator. Like, what does he even say to that?
All right, thank you.
Can I respond?
Chairman Williams, you're recognized.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. As much as I don't like Matt Walsh, that's vile. That's vile. Really? They didn't let him respond to that. I'm sorry. Really? Like, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. I have no sympathy, but that's not how it should be done. I enjoy it, but that's not how it should be done. This is a sinful amount of enjoyment I'm getting right now. He was just like, can I respond to be calling basically like an uneducated ISIS judge? Next, Senator, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion to go back out of session or back into session. Thank you.
That's actually hilarious. Okay, that's enough of that. That is funny though. That is funny. That did make me laugh.